For years, China had been building up to this moment. 2027 was the year that many thought it would happen, the invasion of Taiwan that President Xi Jinping has always threatened. But a wrench has been thrown into the works. China's war machine has been forced to shut down before it ever started rolling, and it's all thanks to a nation thousands of miles away. Ukraine has ended China's invasion of Taiwan, and even the US is shocked by the impact that Ukraine has had on Xi's plans. What Ukraine has been doing doesn't even directly involve Taiwan, yet it still makes Xi furious. China's plans are being held up as its president is frustrated, and it's all happening because of what Ukraine has been doing in its defense of its territory against Russia. Over more than 4 long years of fighting, Ukraine has turned everything that China thought it knew about how an invasion of Taiwan would go on its head, to the point where it's not too much of a stretch to say that Ukraine has played a massive role in making it impossible for China to invade or annex Taiwan at any point in the near future. That sounds like a bold claim, right? But it starts to make a lot more sense when you realize that the Ukraine war has brought with it new tactics and ways of fighting that all nations in Southeast Asia, most of all Taiwan, have been watching and are in the process of adopting. What Ukraine has done is lay down the blueprint for what a smaller nation has to do to defend itself against a military force that seems to be far more powerful on paper. The blueprint isn't specific to Ukraine. It can work for any nation that chooses to adopt it, and in the specific case of Taiwan, the blueprint could be a complete war ender for China. What has been happening these last 4 years has caught Xi completely off guard. Every assumption he made about his invasion of Taiwan has been ground into dust. Before we get to that, let's look at the Chinese plan. Ever since Xi came to power, he has spent massive amounts of resources transforming China into one of the world's most impressive military powers. For years, military spending has been through the roof in China, and Xi isn't pulling the plug on the cash waterfall anytime soon. The 3 years up to 2026 saw China increase its annual defense budget by 7.2% per year, and 2026 will bring with it another 7% increase. The payoff for all of this spending was the creation of a force that should be more than capable of taking Taiwan. Global Firepower says that China has built the world's 3rd strongest military. The Chinese Navy is the world's largest in terms of pure asset numbers, and it's 2nd largest behind the US when it comes to tonnage. China has aircraft and helicopter carriers. It has over 3,500 aircraft in its air force, including almost 1,500 fighter jets. By all accounts, China has evolved from once being the sick man of Asia to the region's most dominant military force, at least on paper. All of this force buildup was supposed to play a huge role in what China has in store for Taiwan. The strategy was going to be simple and traditional, built from what Xi thought he knew about modern military tactics. First blockade, then attrit. The last few years have made it clear that China intends to use its massive navy to create a blockade around Taiwan that is designed to strangle the Taiwanese military. A blockade prevents exports from flowing out and imports from entering Taiwan, and it's a feasible strategy. We only need to look at what both Iran and the US have been doing in the Strait of Hormuz to see that. The so-called Justice Mission 2025, which China held between December 29th and 30th, shows what China has in mind. The military exercise was held all around Taiwan, and it involved Chinese ships and aircraft transiting the East China Sea, the Philippine Sea, and up to the Taiwan Strait. As part of the war games, China simulated a blockade around Taiwan, which China intends to implement both to lead into an amphibious invasion and to feed into the attrition part of its strategy. Speaking about attrition, the other point of China building up such a massive military force was so that it could overwhelm Taiwan through sheer resources alone. That was and still is Russia's strategy in Ukraine. In fact, it is the strategy that Russia has been using since the era of the Soviets and even long before. Simply have more of everything. More soldiers, tanks, ships, planes, equipment, and everything else. Eventually, the enemy will have to crumble because traditional warfare is resource intensive, and the smaller country always has fewer resources than the larger nation. That was the Chinese plan for Taiwan. Blockade, invade, and attrit. China's problem and Taiwan's salvation is what we mentioned earlier in the video. This strategy only works when your opponent fights the same kind of war you fight. That's not what Ukraine has been doing against Russia, and it means that all of the assumptions that China made about its invasion of Taiwan, both naval and on the ground, simply don't exist anymore. What Ukraine has done is show that modern warfare strategies enable a smaller nation to put up a brutal defense against an invading force. That's what we're seeing in Ukraine right now. It's still a war of attrition, only that war isn't about the sheer volume of resources anymore. It's about coming up with the most cost-effective means of destroying what your enemy brings to the battlefield. You can probably already guess what we're going to be talking about here: drones. Ukraine has them, Taiwan wants them, and China fears them. China's desired invasion of Taiwan was never going to be a simple task, no matter how much money, manpower, and metal that Xi threw at it. There was still plenty to overcome. The Taiwan Strait offers very rough seas for much of the year, which can get so bad that they would force breaks in the invasion effort. There are limited possible landing beaches accessible via the strait, and all will be loaded with Taiwanese defenses. Monsoons, typhoons, mountains, and a fearsome defense force all await any Chinese soldiers who are involved in that invasion. The original plans for invading Taiwan still saw China preparing for massive casualties that could easily number in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. It's this sheer cost that has led to China spending so much time preparing for an invasion that, if we only looked at the pure numbers, should see it wipe the floor with Taiwan's military. Missiles have become key to China's strategy, though it knows that Taiwan has the defenses needed to protect itself fairly well from them. The naval blockade was even more important, though that comes with two downsides. First, any ships used in the blockade can't be used in the invasion itself. Second, and far more importantly, ships that are part of China's blockade become sitting ducks. This is where things start to shift, and the blueprint that Ukraine has laid down against Russia really comes to the fore. If a naval blockade is China's plan, then Ukraine can provide Taiwan with precisely what it needs to overcome that blockade, despite Taiwan being a much smaller nation. How do we know? The Black Sea reveals all. But before we dig into that, this is why we make the military show, to explain how power really moves on the battlefield. If you're new to the channel, make sure you hit subscribe to see more videos like this. What China hopes to do in the Taiwan Strait and the surrounding waters is similar to what Russia hoped to do in the Black Sea. Taking advantage of its dangerous warships, Russia wanted to turn the Black Sea into a death zone for Ukraine's cargo ships, in addition to making the waterway a safe route through which Russia could funnel troops and equipment into the Ukrainian mainland by way of Crimea and Russia itself. But now the Black Sea is practically bereft of the famous Russian fleet that took its name from the body of water. Ukraine's maritime and aerial drones are a huge part of the reason why, and they can be the game changer that Taiwan needs to flip Xi's plans on their head. Ukraine's maritime drones have been a constant fixture in the Black Sea for years, and they made headlines again on May 3rd. Unleashed against a pair of Russian Shadow Fleet tankers in Novorossiysk, Ukraine's drones caused major damage to ships stationed in the port. Novorossiysk is where the Black Sea Fleet now lingers after Ukraine's drone and missile attacks forced it out of its traditional base in Sevastopol. What we see here is Ukraine thumbing its nose at Russian naval power once again, and it does it using an asymmetric strategy that traditional warships simply can't handle. Over a third of Russia's Black Sea Fleet has been taken out of the Ukraine war by drones and missiles. What was meant to be a blockade carried out by ships that Ukraine couldn't hurt has been turned into a humiliating retreat for Russia that nobody expected when Putin launched his invasion. We mentioned a blueprint earlier. What Ukraine has done in the Black Sea can be transplanted into the Taiwan Strait and the surrounding waters. Russia has been practically defeated in the Black Sea, and while Russia's navy was always weaker than it appeared, and certainly not as modern as China's, Xi will have seen what happened to Putin's warships. The lessons of the Black Sea have been taken to heart. It doesn't matter how big or strong your warships might be, when you have to bring them closer to the enemy, and especially when they have to stay in one spot as part of a blockade, they become vulnerable to missiles and drones. By following the Ukrainian blueprint, Taiwan could use maritime and aerial drones to shatter China's blockade. Oh, and Taiwan is also in a much better position than Ukraine on the anti-ship missile front. As the Taipei Times revealed on March 11th, Taiwan has around 1,000 of its domestically developed Xiongfeng 2 and 3 anti-ship missiles waiting to go, along with 400 US-made Harpoon missiles. The former are strong enough to devastate entire aircraft carriers. Taiwan knows that what Ukraine can deliver could be the key to ruining China's plans. Ukraine knows it too, and it's no coincidence that Ukraine is building partnerships and links throughout Asia, including with one unexpected nation that we'll reveal toward the end of the video, to send a message to China that Xi's ambitions will be thwarted. Taiwan and Ukraine have been slowly building a stronger relationship since Putin launched his invasion, likely because Taiwan sees plenty of parallels between what Putin did and what Xi intends to do. As far back as November 2023, Taiwan was signing memorandums of understanding with Ukraine as it attended a conference dedicated to helping Ukraine rebuild. Taiwan has provided humanitarian aid to Ukraine for much of the invasion, and the budding relationship has only been growing stronger since the 6 MOUs were signed in Poland in 2023. 2 years later, Taiwan signed another pact with Ukraine, this time to launch a medical program providing doctor training, medical equipment, and other support. Taiwan has stopped short of providing military aid to Ukraine, likely to avoid sparking tensions in the Indo-Pacific. But what has started as a humanitarian relationship seems to be on the verge of evolving. On January 23rd, the Indo-Pacific Defense Forum reported that Taiwan is now looking to partner with Ukraine to develop its drone capabilities. Such a move would make official the sorts of partnerships that have already been developing through private channels, the forum reports. It would also likely support initiatives launched in Taiwan, such as the 5-year drone development program that Taiwan launched back in 2025. The relationship between Taiwan and Ukraine is growing stronger, and much to Xi's dismay, it's clear that Taiwan recognizes that Ukraine has created the blueprint for batting back a Chinese naval invasion. Other nations in the Indo-Pacific have been paying attention to what Ukraine has done against Russia, and they're also mimicking the drone tactics. Thailand has been using Ukraine-like drones to target Cambodian forces, the Telegraph reports. At the 2026 Defense Services Asia exhibition in Malaysia, drones were front and center. The exhibition revealed that there is a massive demand throughout Asia for the types of weapons that Ukraine has been deploying. Even heading west of the Indo-Pacific and into the Gulf region, there are signs of what may be to come between Ukraine and Taiwan. Ukraine has signed decade-long defense deals with several Gulf nations that have been impacted by the war between the US and Iran, and drones lie at the heart of those deals. Putin is obviously angry to see Ukraine gaining so much influence in Asia, but Xi will be even more furious. He is watching literal decades of investing in making China a dominant military power go up in smoke, as drones become the go-to weapons for the various types of nations that China is trying to intimidate with its power. Xi has watched as Taiwan carefully engineered its partnership with a very willing Ukraine, and he now knows that any attempt to launch an invasion would inevitably lead to Ukraine offering drones and expertise to Taiwan. That's what Ukraine is doing in the Gulf, and the fact that it's happening at all shows Xi that he can't even rely on Putin and his forces to distract Ukraine from building these kinds of relationships. The goal for China was to isolate Taiwan. Ukraine looks set to make sure that doesn't happen. And there's still the twist in the tail that's coming up. Before we get to that, there's what Xi intended to do and what is actually going to happen. The intention for Xi was to use what was happening in Ukraine as both a distraction and a potential training ground for Chinese soldiers. While the world watched Ukraine, it wouldn't be paying attention to China and its Taiwan ambitions. When the US unleashed Operation Epic Fury against Iran, that was another distraction. After all, the US is one of the nations that is most likely to come to Taiwan's defense if China invades. Though often contradictory in his statements, US President Donald Trump has claimed that Taiwan will be safe for as long as he is president. Any distraction, such as the one in Iran, is good for Xi. China has even reportedly sent about 200 soldiers into Ukraine, The Hill said in April 2025, supposedly so that they could learn lessons from what they see on the front lines. The Ukraine war was supposed to be key to China's invasion of Taiwan. Now that same war is delivering the lessons and perhaps soon the equipment that will allow Taiwan to defend itself. The reality that Xi has been forced to accept is simple. China fears what drones could do to its ships if it tries to launch an invasion of Taiwan. Ukraine and Taiwan aren't even cooperating on drone production yet, and that fear is still evident because Xi knows that Ukraine has delivered the blueprint for what Taiwan needs to do. We're also seeing evidence that the entire calculus of China's Taiwan invasion has changed. You remember that we mentioned that most believed that China's plan was to invade Taiwan in 2027. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Sky News reports that US intelligence agencies believe that China is no longer planning to invade in 2027 and is instead looking to gain control over the island without any form of military strike. That's a complete turnaround, and it isn't a coincidence. Small and cheap aerial drones, especially those that have ranges long enough to overcome such novel Chinese ideas as building a mobile pier to aid in its invasion of Taiwan, will be lethal to China. The maritime drones that have been sinking Russian ships in the Black Sea could be just as dangerous to Chinese warships, whether those are the vessels that are trying to form a blockade or ships attempting to sail through the Taiwan Strait for an amphibious landing. And though you might argue that China has more naval might that it can bring to bear against Taiwan than Russia has inside the Black Sea, and you'd be correct, China also can't move its troops into Taiwan via land, as Russia could in Ukraine. It's amphibious and aerial landings or nothing. Ukraine's drone-focused blueprint is tailor-made to overcome both. And now for the twist in the tail. It's not just Ukraine and Taiwan that will be worrying Xi. Over in India, there are signs that Ukraine is building its influence too. Though India is much like China in that it has happily been taking advantage of lower Russian oil prices forced by sanctions, there has also been a shift in India's defense posture since the Ukraine war began. A nation that once saw 76% of its weapon imports come from Russia between 2009 and 2013 has been reducing its purchases of Russian weapons to the point where they only accounted for 36% of imports between 2019 and 2023. And one of the nations that is replacing Russia as a weapons provider to India may be Ukraine. On January 29th, it was revealed that India had purchased VBAT drones that are combat tested in Ukraine, which is a sign that one of China's biggest rivals for Asian dominance is also starting to learn lessons from the nation that has provided such a powerful blueprint to Taiwan. This is a problem for China. If India starts supporting Ukraine and vice versa, it becomes a much harder target for China to penetrate. Obviously, the same goes for Taiwan, as we've explained, as well as the entire Indo-Pacific region. After so many years of playing catch-up to the world's largest militaries, to the point where it became the front-running power player in the Indo-Pacific, China is now having to reassess every plan it ever had for exerting its military dominance. And there is now a chance, no matter how small, that China might even decide to cancel its plans for Taiwan altogether and instead focus on another nation that possesses territory to which China lays claim. That nation is Russia. And Putin may soon find that the true endgame of his Ukraine invasion is that he becomes the final domino to fall in a series of geopolitical events that he never saw coming. His invasion made Ukraine stronger. Ukraine's development of its drone-based defense has inspired other smaller nations such as Taiwan. China now faces serious problems in the Indo-Pacific due to the shift in what we thought we knew about modern warfare. And that shift could lead to China turning its attention north so it can go after Russian lands where a big part of the population already speaks Chinese. Could it be that Xi and Putin are going to turn against one another? That would be a turn of events that seemed almost impossible just a few years ago, when Taiwan seemed to be China's focus. But we may already be seeing the start of China creeping into Russia. Xi has been taking advantage of Putin's mounting desperation for a while now. Russian land is already essentially becoming Chinese, and it may not be long before Xi gives up on Taiwan and tackles a weakened Russia instead. Putin may not be able to stop this, and you can find out more by watching our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to The Military Show if you want to see more analysis of the latest geopolitical developments. And thank you for watching.